From OnProduct. Good day, everybody. Here's Alice from OnProduct. I'm happy to welcome you here, and a couple of things about OnProduct. It's a living community of product people, meaning product managers, designers, engineers, quality assurance engineers, everybody who is building products and is willing to exchange their ideas and apply good practices that you learn here today in their day-to-day work. Today we have two speakers for you. The first one, Marcus, VP product from PostHog. Marcus has been working at PostHog since 2021. He has been working also on Facebook shops and also has many years of experience in rail operations. And PostHog has already raised since 2020, 27 million in funding or even more. Impressive, isn't it? The second speaker of ours is Shruti. Shruti is a senior developer advocate at Restack. She's a Jill of all trades. She's coming from work experience from infamous Hyett technologies and has also background in embedded systems. So she's an active advocate of open source software, which is a highlight of our topic today. And I'm handing over to Marcus.
Great, thank you. I will just quickly share my screen. One moment. Great. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about what I learned from watching 500 users use our product. It's quite a big undertaking, but I learned a lot, and I want to kind of talk you through the process I went through to find out all sorts of interesting stuff about our customers. So, first question is, what is a PostHog? We build a tool that enables you to build better products. Our mission is to increase the number of successful products in the world. And PostHog itself is essentially a platform that allows you to bring in the data that users are generating using your product, their behavior from your product, analyze that data, review recordings of the users actually interacting with it, look at heat maps, see which areas are most popular and where people are clicking, where people are moving away, feature flags, turning features on and off so you can roll out new things safely, experimentation so you can do A/B tests to find out what new feature or new change is really making the difference. And then also some auto capture capabilities to make it much easier to get started and set up in the first place. So I'm going to go through a lot of examples that are about PostHog itself. So some of it's very, very meta, like using PostHog to analyze PostHog. But just a brief overview, it's all about these simple tools to make growing your product better. So problem is, over the last few years, there's just been an enormous explosion in quantitative analytics tools and practices. For example, PostHog and Amplitude, Mixpanel, Hyett, BigQuery. There's a huge amount of investment in many businesses building data warehouses, bringing data in, building up huge analytics teams to go and understand data, big data, the modern data stack, all of these things, huge growth in quantitative analytics. And it's been really important to help people make better decisions. However, qualitative analysis is just as important. Sometimes the data doesn't give you the whole truth. Sometimes it's just a clue as to what might be going on, and getting some extra clues from how people feel and think are even more valuable to building a really great product. Only problem with qualitative analysis is it takes a vast amount of time to interview hundreds of users. They're quite hard to get hold of in the first place. It's quite difficult to avoid selecting people who dislike your product, who can potentially give you the most feedback because they're probably not interested in talking to you. It's also so easy to influence what someone says when you speak to someone, just asking them if they like a feature, or have you thought about doing it this way, or those types of things. Seems very innocent when you're talking to someone to get the answer that you want, but often you're just leading them to conclude that your decision is already great that you kind of come up with. So it's really difficult to get it right, and might lead you to false conclusions, might lead you to build the wrong thing. Big question here is, how can we understand users without influencing their behavior and at scale? And the answer here, and you kind of got it from the headline of the presentation, is watch loads of session recordings. I think it's really important to point out here as well, is session recordings is essentially someone using your product. They are not actively being watched. You're not sat behind them watching them. You're not asking them questions. They're just naturally in their own environment using the product. So you get really, really unbiased experience. They might not tell you why they feel a certain way or why they're doing something, but you can infer that from their repeated behaviors that are very similar. But it's really important to respect people's privacy. So anonymizing and obscuring any personal sensitive data, making sure you only use session recording where it's necessary and where it's valuable. Don't just like put it everywhere. It can be a really powerful tool, but it's really important to make sure that you consider the privacy of the users as well. So what is the process that I followed when watching 500 session recordings? I think general advice for product managers is focus, prioritize, come up with a strategy for breaking down the problems and identifying opportunities and all of these kinds of things, and have a really clear framework for how you work. But I actually find doing the complete opposite to all that is a really great way to get started. So I picked recordings pretty much at random. Just went through a list, didn't look at the companies that people worked for, didn't look at what they were doing, just randomly clicked, happened at a certain day, a certain time, watch it. I watched the entire session recording from start to finish. People generally use our product for say like 20, 30 minutes at a time. A whole 30 minutes, maybe sped up, maybe at 4 or 5 times the normal speed, but I didn't skip it. I watched all the way through. And I really felt their pain. Actually watching someone really struggle using the product, it gave me a lot of empathy for how the users were feeling, and kind of enabled me to start putting my head in their mindset. And so you can see on the right here, there's actually a session recording of a user kind of clicking around PostHog, looking at dashboards, looking at insights, etc. It's kind of sped up. But what I tried to do every time I saw something surprising, so I was like, oh, I wouldn't have done that. Why is this user done that? Or why can't they just hit that button there? Like a lot of the time, it's like I use the product every day myself, and kind of surprised when someone does something different. So every time I saw someone doing something surprising, I asked myself, why did they do that? And tried to start building up some potential hypotheses or findings of what might be going on. So I'm going to run you through a bunch of findings. They're not kind of connected to each other. I found out loads of things doing this exercise, but I just want to kind of cover the breadth. First finding, and as you can see, this recording is really annoying and really fast and moving around lots. It's exactly what it was like. People are often lost when they use our product for the first time. And it was super clear to me, people would log in and they would click around every single feature in the product. They click up and down everything. They'd open a few menus. They're looking for something, but they can't quite find out what it is. And they get frustrated and they move around a lot. And it's very clear to me that they've been dropped into this product that could do loads of stuff, but they have no idea to where to get started. Or they're looking for something specific, it's just not available. So really here, the finding is there's something we can do to improve the onboarding experience to make it easier for someone to get set up and start achieving something they came to solve. Finding number 2, something that may sound so obvious, but only when you really watch it in these recordings can you really understand it, which is a lot of people try and create a dashboard with their key metrics on. So this person here has created cumulative daily active users. They're really excited to understand the daily active users. They create this, put a lot of effort into creating it. They put it on a dashboard. They can't wait to see their dashboard. And then they have this message that says there are no matching events for this query. And the problem is they never brought any data into PostHog. They didn't connect it to their website. They haven't set up another data source to bring information in. So they can't actually view the cumulative daily active users. And so people are actually putting a lot of energy and effort, but they either don't have the tools or the team or the skills or the permission to integrate the data ingestion part in order to be able to get the value out of the data. So people are kind of getting ahead of themselves trying to set things up, but get really disappointed when they can't actually analyze any data. And so like potentially what we can do with this is like, maybe we don't even allow people to start using the product until they have data. Like Didn't want people to get excited and then kind of tear it all away from them when they can't get anything out of it. Or maybe send them to a demo environment where they can experience the full data experience with someone else's data, or not someone else's data, but generated data in there. Next step, after the random clicking around and watching lots and lots and lots of different recordings, this is where focus comes in. So I filtered down recordings to focus on trends that I saw. So watching a few hundred recordings, suddenly different similar activities keep showing up. People doing the same thing, people tripping over at the same time, similar behaviors. And so writing a list of those and then focusing in on those individual trends and trying to understand, like, what is driving this trend? Like, what is the scope of this problem? And so something like users search for documentation quite a lot. They spend a lot of time in the documentation while they're using our product. That's an interesting trend, but like, why? And like, what value is it giving them? Like, I want to go and go much deeper and understand a bit more about that. So when I saw similar things, I noted possible hypotheses for the root cause, and then just went deeper and deeper and deeper and watched more recordings that did that same action. So you can see here on the right, I've gone and filtered my events by doc search used. I've got this list of users who've done recordings in the last few minutes or so, who've gone and used the doc search as well. So I can go and watch more and more of those to see and expand that kind of problem that I started looking into. So finding 3 was exactly around those documentation users, which is engaged users love our documentation, and they regularly switch between using the product and reading the documentation that's relevant to that part of the product. And my hypothesis here, and you might come up with a totally different hypothesis, is like good documentation helps unblock struggling users. Our product's kind of complicated. It does a lot of things where, not many people are familiar with, a lot of the tools that are available out there today in product analytics. People are getting into it the first time. They're working with data. They're working with a new product maybe they're building. Our documentation is a lifeline for people to kind of learn and understand how to do those things. With this hypothesis, potentially, maybe we should invest more in better documentation. We should maybe identify documentation that's not used very well, or when people are using a product and there's no documentation feature, there's no documentation that matches that. Or maybe we should try and get rid of the documentation and make all of the information in line with guided tours and these kind of things. But it was quite clear to me that people who are successful were spending a lot of time using our documentation. Next finding, people really struggle to use the product on mobile devices. The boxes are in the wrong place, they overlap, some buttons don't even work. It's kind of a terrible experience. We never tried to build it for mobile. We built it for desktop users where they'll have the screen space where they can watch full screen session recordings of people using their product on a full desktop experience as well. So we hadn't optimized it, but looking at the experience when someone does try and have it on a mobile user, it can be quite bad. It can be quite good as well. So actually, one of the things that surprised me is some of the areas of the product work quite well on mobile. But understanding this comes to a conclusion or a hypothesis around maybe we didn't allow anyone on a mobile device to use it, because rather they went to a desktop and had a proper experience and got frustrated trying to solve something that isn't quite possible on mobile. Or maybe we could build a dedicated mobile app or something to reach this audience. I think from our perspective, actually, the number of users who are using mobile devices was super, super small and probably not worth solving for. So trying to get them to avoid using it and go on desktop is probably the best thing for us. But maybe if we found that like 50% of our users or more were on mobile, it would be a great investment to go and build a mobile app. The next phase, after we focused in and got to really understand the nuances of a bunch of these problems, is sizing up. So like I just said around mobile, like how many people are affected by this thing, it really depends on how many people are affected or what the magnitude of the problem is as to whether or not we should go and fix it. And so when we've identified these problems, these hypotheses, what are the actions we can take and how can we prioritize them? So some problems affect more users than others. It's important to work out how big they are in order to prioritize them. This is an example of a funnel right here on the right-hand side. You can see people coming in from page view to sign up to purchase. You can see people dropping off at each stage. Like potentially there's an opportunity to go and increase that level for one of these features. So sizing them up. Finding number 5 the funnels feature I just showed you, and you can see here again on the right, actually 19.1% of people leave funnels to find out details about individual users to work out why they dropped off. And so you can see from the recordings that this is a behavior that people are doing. You can now look at the data and size it up and see, well, it's actually happening really frequently. And so the opportunity here we have is to make it really easy to get data on those people, the individual people who are dropping off the funnel, without leaving the funnel view. So we can keep them here, so they have to keep flipping backwards and forwards. They can look at multiple people at the same time. They can make loads of decisions way quicker. The next finding, 87.5% of the time, people look at the non-default time period on our funnels. So we arbitrarily, I guess, decided to show people the last 7 days of data. Showing them less data from a technical point of view is actually beneficial because it uses less query and resources to process the results, and it's cheaper, I guess, to some extent. So having a really long time range would be difficult. It would take ages to load. So we went for 7 days. But it turns out that virtually every single time someone comes to this, they immediately change it to 30 days. Watching the session recording gave me the indication people were changing the dates and times to different things, but actually looking at the data, it becomes super clear that the default time period is wrong and that we can go and change it, and we can make people's lives a lot easier. And given this is one of the most popular features we've used, it's like a really important thing to make people's lives a lot easier that are already using our product. So these are a bunch of findings that I found from watching a ton of session recordings. I found like all sorts of other things, and loads of our customers and people who use our competitors' products like Full Story, etc., have found loads of interesting things by watching session recordings. Key thing to point out though is there is no substitute for speaking to customers. Like when you've kind of found these opportunities, actually going and speaking to real people. Maybe they're the people you identified in the data, or maybe they're just other users that you're interviewing, and really validating they are experiencing these problems and potential solutions that you might have in mind and will they work for them is really important as well. So it's really a combination of scaled quantitative, scaled qualitative through session recordings, and those like one-on-one conversations that helps us get the information that we need to go and build a product that really solves our users' needs. So in conclusion, against all normal advice, I say don't start by trying to be methodical. Just binge watch recordings like it's your favorite box set on Netflix. Watch and watch and watch and watch and watch to just build empathy for your users. How do they use your product? Where are they struggling? What are the things they care about? What are the things that they do that completely surprise you that you would never do because you're too used to using your product? Then really focus in on the problems you see happening over and over again. As you've gone through, you kind of pick these things out. And when you do binge watch, don't just watch the same day or the same people or the same company. Really go broad as you can. And then you can focus in on the ones that look most interesting. They may not be super frequent, but look into the most interesting ones. Then once you've got some really interesting problems, go and size them up. Use some real data to identify how big they are, what the value of fixing them is, and use that additional context and empathy you have to build better solutions. And don't forget to speak to the actual customers themselves and really understand their perspective, because these are only ever going to be clues. What the customers tell you is what they actually were thinking. Hopefully they remember. That's it from me. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Marcus. It looks that we already tackled the ones that were in our LinkedIn or YouTube. Maybe a question from me: do you still binge watch user recordings?
Yeah, definitely. We have a feature that we recently built, which kind of on the homepage of PostHog, every time you log in, it kind of shows you like the last 5 session recordings, and at least once a day, I will go in and watch 1 or 2 of those recordings just because I'm interested. Like, what is someone doing right now? What did someone do a minute ago? And I always find something interesting in it. So yeah, it makes me feel a lot closer to the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's also very, very good way of building the routine of doing the user research. I mean, it's not like not the very proactive, right? But like more like reactive way of doing the user research. But definitely cool. Do you also like promote it to your like team? So do they also like watch it, or like which kind of other ways do you do like the user research?
Yeah, I think the whole team uses PostHog themselves to try and understand problems within their scope. I think I take a slightly different, like a broader approach by just trying to understand what everyone's doing. But like individual engineers who are working on a particular feature will really want to understand how people are using that feature they've just built or the feature they're about to build. And so the session recordings is a really great way to quickly get a load of context on what might be a good approach.
Cool. Thank you so much. And if there are any more questions for Marcus, please post them here on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and then we'll ready for our next speaker. Shruti, please come to stage.
Hey, thank you for having me. I will quickly load up my presentation. Okay, let's begin. So, hi, my name is Shruti, and like Alice introduced me, I am a developer advocate at Restack. And today I'm going to talk to you about why product managers should be early adopters of open source software, open source tools. And to convince you to do that, I'm going to take you through 3 points. So, one, open source is awesome. So I come from the embedded systems industry, and I think everything there relies on open source. So I think I've had all my education and all my previous work based on open source tools. Without that, we would be nowhere. But then there's always a but. When something is amazing, there's always a but. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the issues, some of the problems that would occur when you choose to use open source tools and software. And then I'm going to introduce you to the Restack effect and where Restack comes in and helps you. So let's begin. So like I said, why open source? Now, yeah, is my slide changing? Okay, so why open source, right? So first of all, like everyone knows all the awesome things about open source and why we need to use it. One of the most important things is that as a developer, open source gives you complete control over your product. For example, if you were using a SaaS tool to build an ETL service. So let's say you start using Fivetran. Now you have these different sources where your data is coming from. So you have some data from your sales pipelines, from your marketing tools. You have some from users. You have data of your product itself. And now the thing is, you need to combine all this data and analyze it for different reasons to figure out what to do with your product, how to make it better, and so on. Now, having worked in different companies of different sizes, I know that there's a lot of legacy tools that are being used. So now imagine you had a really, really old tool, and maybe Fivetran does not have a connector to it, let's say. So what do? The easiest option is tell Fivetran people to build it. Cool, it takes 2 years. If your developers or if the agency you've hired to maintain your tools for you, if you tell them to build this tool, it is upon them to constantly keep maintaining the connector depending on the new versions of this tool and new versions of your tools and so on. So what is happening is that your developers are spending more time maintaining this tool than actually building your product. On the other hand, if you look at Airbyte is an open source ETL tool, and Airbyte has awesome documentation. It has really good documentation to contribute. So if you're using Airbyte, you can quickly go through their documentation, find out what connectors they have. And then if you need to build another connector, you just go through their documentation on how to contribute. You add a connector to their main repo, and then they maintain it. So every time you don't have to keep maintaining your connector for this. So it makes the life of developers super easy, and the developers have control over the tool you're using. Now let's take another example with Calendly. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you have used Calendly to like schedule one-on-one meetings with each other. On the other hand, if you see cal.com, which is the open source version of a scheduler, or you can even call it like a scheduling as infrastructure. So if you wanted to use it as a product manager, as an engineer to schedule some of your internal toolings, internal processes, you could use it as an internal scheduler and modify it to your needs. So what you can do is open source allows you to actually make the tool yours. modify it to your need and have complete control over the tool. Now, the second thing about open source is, of course, we've been talking about it for a while, which is data ownership. So open source gives you control over your data. You know that it is very essential. We know where where our data lies, because not only are we handling our data, but we are also handling our customers' data. So it is very important to know where your data is and how is it being handled and who is handling it. Now, in a company, when you have multiple tools for multiple reasons, your data is basically being spread across if you're using SaaS tools. So you using different tools, your data is being used by everyone. You don't know if they're selling your data for advertisement. You don't know if they're selling your data for different purposes. We just don't know, right? And the best thing for us would be then to have control over all this data. So using open source tools gives you data ownership. All this data lies within your servers, within your group, within your team, within your company itself. You know what is going on with it. You have control over what should be done with it, and you know that no one is speaking into it, no one is selling it for advertisement or whatnot. On the other hand, there's also issue of data governance. So with open source, you have this granularity which you can set. Which team has access to what data, which team can look into what data, user permissions and all those things. So you can have this data governance with open source, which makes it very, let's say, customized of how this data is handled, who has access to this data, different policies and licenses and so on. Then, as we speak about licenses, we also have to speak about compliance. Consider medical tools or tools which handle medical data, apps which handle medical data. They need to have HIPAA compliance. On the other hand, it is compulsory to have GDPR compliance in EU. Then there is the California Consumer Privacy Act. And then there are different compliances that different tools need. And with open source, you can implement all of them. If you're using SaaS, of course, some tools come with some of these compliances, and then you'd have to probably pay them a large fee to implement them, or like wait for a while or hire an agency and so on. With open source, you have this control, you can implement it, and when all the data is in your server, you have more control to be able to implement it, make sure nothing is going wrong. And having said that, there's also the issue of security. So imagine you're using Calendly, and let's say Calendly's server goes down. Everything goes down. Everything is affected. If the Calendly server is hacked, they can get into your system and your data might be compromised. On the other hand, when you have control over this data, over the server, you have control over your security, over the security of your data, of your product, of your users, customers, and everything. So, which is why when it comes to data, open source is definitely the best option that a team can go for. Now, open source is not just for data privacy, data control, or not just because it's free to use. Open source is no more just the free version of SaaS. If you see some of the tools that have been coming in the recent times, let's consider the analytics world, right? If you see some of the tools, they're actually the best of breed tools. So depending on your use case, there are these different open source tools like Matomo, like PostHog, Metabase, you have Apache Spark, you have Plausible Analytics. All these tools are actually the best of breed depending on what use case you want to use them for. And these are just the analytics tools. There are so many tools in the whole data stack. There is the ETL stack, the different tools in every possible way that you can use, and they're actually the best of breed tools. They're not just the free versions, they're not just the HIPAA compliant or the GDPR version of tools. So what you get is not just a compliant version or a data privacy sort of version, but you also get the best of the products. So now that I've hopefully convinced you why you should go for open source, we can come to the but. The but part of it is that deployment of open source tools or deploying open source and maintaining them is extremely difficult. If you wanted to do session recording, you could simply go to Hotjar, click on create your free account, and you're in. You start using it, you play around. Of course, there's a lot of things later on, but then the starting of it is super simple. If you wanted to deploy, let's say, PostHog, what you would need to do is first have someone do the infrastructure. So let's say, set up an EKS, set up the infrastructure, figure out what is the EC2 instance you need, how much volumes, what workloads, all those things you need to figure out. So you need to have an expert who knows all of that. Then you set up the Kubernetes layer, wherein you are sort of provisioning this cluster, taking care of networking, taking care of what URL you're going to get, taking care of all the different things within it. And then you have someone building the app itself, so the app layer, so the people deploying the app itself. And having done all of this, it's not a one-person job. I have tried it. It is definitely not a one-person's job. So you definitely have to have at least 3 different people to deploy this, maintain it, make sure it's on all the time. Now, this is the but part, this is the difficulty part, and this is what we're trying to solve with Restack. So with Restack, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you this SaaS experience of like a one-button click to deploy any app, but with open source tools. So let's say, again, you want to deploy PostHog. So you get started, you decide you want to deploy PostHog, you go to Restack, and then you log in. And from a huge sort of options, you select PostHog. When you select PostHog, you click on deploy, and you're done. Your PostHog app will be ready to use within minutes. What you see is you have just clicked a few things, or actually even 2 or 3 clicks, and you have the app running. But what you see is the tip of the iceberg. What Restack is doing in the back end is we are setting up the server for you. We are provisioning the Kubernetes cluster. We are provisioning the EKS setup. We are taking care of the networking, the internal routing tables and everything. We are taking care of the packaging. We're taking care of release management when a new, let's say PostHog has a new update that you really want to include in your application. We take care of that for you. We manage different environments. If you want to test it out, if you want to have a production, if you want to have a separate development where you test out the new versions, where you test out your own connectors, maybe we do that for you. Then of course, you want to make sure everything is running fine. So we give you observability where you can see that your product is running fine, your application is running fine. Then if you want to maintain replicas, we also do that for you. If you want to have different integrations, we add that for you on the back end. Again, you don't have to do any of this. And then again, there's compliance. So if you, because essentially the application is in your cluster, you can definitely implement different compliances to it and make sure your application is ready to go. So I can quickly show you a demo of what I've been saying instead of just talking about it. So let me pull up this demo. Let's see. Okay. So I go to Restack and I click on open and applications, and I can select from all these different applications. So again, you're not doing any of the clusters, set up anything. I just click PostHog. I select what cluster I want to add it in. And then for example, you can also add your own clusters here. So I've just selected one of the clusters that I added. And then I just do add applications. And that's it. That's all you have to do on the back end. What we're doing is, like I said, we've set up a cluster for you. We are, for example, you'll see this. We are taking care of the workloads. We're setting up volumes. We are doing the networking. Even the URL that you will click to access PostHog, we will create that for you. So if you can see here on the right, you have this URL section. And yeah, basically once the deployment is done, the status changes from deploying to done, active. You can just click on the link and you have PostHog running in minutes. There you go. So you have PostHog ready. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I'm going to bring up Alice back up.
Thank you so much, Shruti. We don't have any questions so far, just the encouragement from our YouTube users so that we keep up the good work. Thank you so much for that. I think we can all bring all the speakers to the...
Sounds good, sounds good. I'm going to bring Marcus up. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, then I would say if there are no further questions, unless you guys have anything to add to the meetups, then I would suggest we can give ourselves back the 24 minutes of our time and then enjoy the beautiful weather in the evening.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good?
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Marcus. And have a great one.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.